Any comment from you, Mrs. Siegel?
Well, I'm thinking about all the things that go onto the internet that are undigested and unedited, as you all have mentioned. And as Max mentioned, newspapers have highly trained people who not only report on areas in which they have a lot of experience, and I'm not just talking about Pakistan, but covering the zoning board or the school board in a town or in several towns. And that story is then read by several editors before it is put into a newspaper. Mistakes that are made are usually corrected in the next edition if we find out about them in the journalism business. On the internet, a mistake can last forever and be repeated and repeated and repeated, and people begin to think it's true.
And that can be very risky, especially if that mistake might be referencing data or some policy statement or something related to medical news. And I know sometimes I have hesitation when I look upon some of these things. Now let's move to our third question. What might you suggest are the better ways by which print media could sustain its role in providing vital news and stories for the public at large? Or most they simply concede to sustain their niche population market? Max?
What I would say is that one of the things that print media has done wrong is try and adapt their model to the internet. I mean, The Economist was one of the publications we mentioned earlier. That's one of the most successful magazines right now. And a lot of that, I think, the reason that is because up until recently, their online version has not nearly been as substantial, and just the website wasn't that user-friendly. I mean, you have websites like Newsweek.com, Time.com, where they're really trying to sell their website and put all the content there. If they held that back and just had a print version, they might be able to be more successful in not trying to adapt to the new world.
Do you find a lot of these news websites are also just cluttered with distraction? You know, the ads, the side notes, and all that?
I mean, no more than an issue of the New York Times. There's advertisements everywhere.
Okay.
I mean, so does that really distract me? I mean, you obviously don't have a flashing, you won $10,000 in the New York Times, but online you might. If that's considered a distraction, then yeah, there's obviously more distraction.
Max points out that The Economist has been very successful, but I think that The Economist must have something within its covers that grabs an audience and holds a large number of audience readers. And I'm not sure I agree that just withholding some of their information from the internet is the reason they remain so popular. They must have something that readers really want to read.
Well, I would say that obviously anyone who's selling anything, someone wants it. But there's a difference between allowing that content to be on for free or by purchase. And that's what
absolutely.
Economist kind of withheld for a while, is the free version.
I think that's probably right.
And perhaps what newspapers need to do is, if they are switching models of like business models to incorporate selling their information on the internet, perhaps they need to figure out how to sell that information on the internet rather than give it away for free.
But I think there's a connection here to something you said earlier, and that is, I'm a reader of The Economist, and one of the things is, A, it's global in its perspective, and B, you know you can trust it. And the trust of that content makes the reading of it so desirable in my bias. And this is what I see, especially even when I read Atlantic Monthly. You know, there's a quality there. But I'm not sure, because of the quality with which it is written, if these publications can expand their audience. Because for some, they just may be too challenging. And they don't have that pop stigma like, you know, nowadays in my bias, it's hard to distinguish between People magazine and Time magazine with the way things are done. Lots of glitz, lots of glitter, but then in my prejudice, substance gets dismissed. And I certainly can't say I'm correct about that, but that's what I think. Do you have any reflection?
I definitely agree with you about that, how it's getting harder and harder to distinguish like pop culture magazines from informational magazines, because the magazines have to make themselves more aesthetically pleasing and like attention grabbing to to keep their market with the internet. So the substance is kind of going away a little bit because they need to grab attention.
Well, let's move to our fourth question. Do you foresee the casual pop style of journalism we find in publications like People, and one could argue even Time, which I've just mentioned, as well as Newsweek and some others, as the only recourse to stay alive and compete in the print media market? What would this say about American culture overall? Caroline, would you mind sharing your reflective thoughts on that?
Well, as I was just saying, I think that since it's so vital to grab people's attention to get them to buy your magazine in the world of the internet, I think that it is kind of the only recourse for them to stay alive is to get casual and pop culture-esque. And I think that this says about American culture that we're kind of too far gone into the internet age and less, I don't want to say less intellectual, but the American culture is becoming a little bit dependent on entertainment over substance.
Yeah, I know one of the kick words in the marketplace now is infotainment for news, which I find appalling, but again, that's just my perspective on that. Anyone else want to share a reflective thought about this?
I'm scared about what that says about American culture because it doesn't bode well.
No, I mean, obviously my bias is there.
Right.
Can you see a counterpoint at all here?
Yeah, what I would say is that magazines like, and I'll point out Newsweek because I get Newsweek every week as I get The Economist, and their objectives I think are somewhat different. If you open up The Economist and you've never done it before, you're kind of surprised because it's almost all words, a few pictures, and a couple headlines. It looks almost like a newspaper the way it's just jammed full of print. And it's really reporting news, that happened over the week. Newsweek, Time, what fills their pages is more likely to be commentary than news, and I think that's a little bit of a difference. It's not necessarily, they're not trying to do what the New York Times does and stuff a bunch of news from the week or a day into their pages. They're providing commentary from their authors.
But are they also just trying to make it fun and friendly? And is that telling us that we're just resistant, too busy to want to think about this?
I think that you can organize a page with the exact same content. I mean, if you have, and we do this at the Masuk Press. Miss Siegel, I'm sure, can tell you we move around the pages all the time, switch up the layout, but the content that goes on there is still the same. So don't let some blank space or funky column structure fool you into thinking that it's not a serious publication.